Welcome. Welcome to Poetry Flash in Berkeley, California. I'm Joyce Jenkins. Today we are delighted to present D. Nurkse to celebrate his new book, A Country of Strangers, New and Selected Poems. And he's going to be reading with Berkeley's own Eliot Schain. Books for this reading, including Dennis Nurkse's A Country of Strangers, are available at bookshop.org/shop/poetryflash. Eliot Schain's The Distant Sound is also available at Small Press Distribution, www.spdbooks.org. The links are in the chat box. To the best of our tech ability, you are muted on entry. Please stay muted. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the Poetry Flash YouTube channel and Facebook page. At the end, when the recording ends, we'll keep the Zoom on for a few minutes so those who are joining us live may say hello or ask a question. Visit poetryflash.org to join our email list to receive notice of future events and to read insightful interviews and reviews and see news about upcoming events in California. Now to begin, I'm truly delighted to have these two exciting poets with us today. Eliot Schain's recent collection is The Distant Sound. Bruce Isaacson says, an unforgettable modern voice. In Schain's poetry, the inexhaustible American hunger confronts its limits. Wilderness defiled by industry, the nuclear family gone ballistic, love turned impossible. Here, wisdom and madness live side by side. Take the reader's hand and walk us toward the uncertain future. Once you have heard his cadences, you will not forget. Eliot Schain's books also include American Romance and Westering Angels. His work has appeared in Plowshares, American Poetry Review, Santa Monica Review, Another Chicago Magazine, and many other journals, along with 4 excellent anthologies. He served as program director for the Poetry Society of America, taught high school, and is now a psychotherapist in Berkeley. And we're really glad to have him with us today. It'll be really interesting to see if he reads new work or what he will bring to us today. Let's give a warm welcome to Eliot Schain.
Hi, Joyce, thank you. Can everybody see and hear me okay? All right, good. And thanks for reading Bruce's quote. That's such a cool quote. I appreciate that. I'm going to start with a crowd pleaser, and I say that with tongue in cheek, but truly people seem to like this poem. So I'm going to begin with that. It's called Bodhisattva West. It's in this marvelous anthology from 16 Rivers Press before I was in it, called The Place That Inhabits Us. Bodhisattva West. Go ahead. Ask me if I care about the filthy town they came to. My great-grandfather, again a butcher. My great-grandmother, ashamed of her pierced ears. Clear across the continent, I sit on a mountaintop, following my breath and eyeing the vast Pacific. Ask me if I care that this breath first hitchhiked across the Atlantic inside 2 Polish teenagers. What does it have to do with this mountain laurel? My body next to it, dissolving, that breath ready to leap again. Here's another crowd pleaser. It's called Tonic Minor. Tonic Minor refers to a particular tone in music, and as you can guess, leans into the minor chords. Cycling the North Coast, I think of the birth of cool as a blue jay follows me, darting and dipping like miles. This sound is not ours alone. The trumpet in the darkened club, dense with grief, with revelation, rises out of the blood of all earth's creatures, out of the light that sinks into every frantic eye. I know this bird is not sorrow. I know this bird is not grief, but the dark clouds suckling the hills are almost the breast that fills the baby, nearly the waves that slow the backbeat to make the human swoon. I am riding north to escape this body, to encourage wind in its persistent desire to change us. I am riding bird, and I am alone, like the giant on stage whose eyes glaze to increase the miles, who welcomes shocks from the road, a sudden lightning, because birds can sense when the earth is about to give. Its symbols will hush, when the sister mysteries will blow out the final note we love. And one more that I have been told people like, so I'm in my comfort zone now, and then it'll get dangerous. This poem is called Patio. It takes place in Los Angeles, where I hope you all know in the mid-20th century, Los Angeles was a great haven for intellectuals and artists fleeing the nightmares of Europe. Patio. Your patio was for parties, a cement slab with a corrugated pea green roof, later embellished with Sears bar and grill, stereophonic sound, mutable track lighting, and surrounded on three sides by blooming jacaranda and bougainvillea. For this was post-war Los Angeles, and the patios were stepping out, flushed with money and liquor, the melodies of jazz, then British rock, a stage set for the jaunty cravats and diaphanous shirts that would look out over the lush, though not quite Bel Air space between a prosperous but still working class neighborhood and the National Cemetery, where identical white tombstones stretched like shuttered dominoes with the cold, soulless efficiency your revelers were trying to forget here on the patio. The price of one war paid, another coming for painters, directors, shrinks, and anesthesiologists, all immigrants bundled in victory amid the warm Mediterranean air, where despite misalignments of marriage and career, the generalized anguish that kept the depressants flowing, there was a sweetness to this surcharged nation, woven from yarns that crossed like rats on boats, affection in stray moments of this massive quinceañera, perfumed as it was by the fumes of a nearby freeway and the balm of the hidden stars. Okay, I'm gonna take a little risk here. I mean, I guess I wanna say, you know, I really was thinking about this. Critique, not necessarily validation. Isn't that what artists do? Critique, not necessarily validation. I was reading in the New York Times yesterday, this morning, about, you know, just the book industry in general, censoring itself. Like what? It's something, you know, I'm on the other side. Anyway, To understand this very short poem from my first book, Westering Angels, you do need to know that pocketbook is a slang term for a woman's sex, privates. So anyway, I guess I'm giving you a trigger warning also. So if you want, it is about sex. If you want to take it off, go ahead. Come back in a minute. The hot day. Going 80 down the highway. Metallica booming. Your tattooed forearm hangs out the window of your powerful car. You suck the cigarette between your lips, steer with your knees, send your free hand toward your baby's pocketbook, not the one with money. When you get there, she hardly moves. You go electric in the back of your neck, burn through your jeans. Praise God, it's the birth of America. I'm going to read a couple of new poems now. So theme, there is theme here. Why cars? When I was 16, I slid behind the wheel of my friend's Camaro, which was parked in the student lot out behind the high school gym in a Los Angeles full of mammoth freeways and snaking canyon roads, which hadn't yet clogged into grinding tedium, but were still expansion for both a country and the mind. And as I sat gripping the slick leather steering wheel with my friend bent and peering in through the window at the key on its silver ring circling my index finger, I swelled like in sex, but better, for the feeling was all over and even burrowing into my intuition. So I could sense what was coming in wooded parks and dive bars with empathic girls who would, for a few hours, complete me the way my family never had. That the wheel would keep turning until I could hold it steady under two fingers on the straightaway across a life I would finally love. The Rambler. My grandfather, who'd been born in Russia at the turn of the last century, did his best to grow the America within him and adjust to modernity with suspicion but not hostility. So he owned a 62 Rambler back before I was able to understand. The Rambler was not like the Chevys or Fords my friends were driven in, which sailed up and down the streets of the suburb we hailed from. This car had a certain blockiness to it, with fat pearly dials and a naugahyde wheel, was more like that console radio in grandfather's small one-bedroom apartment. When he would enter the Rambler, which wasn't very often, he'd carefully start the ignition, then whistle and concentrate, as if taking apart a mechanical device, like a watch or a toaster or the summer fan, the way he'd played dominoes alone, always whistling. He'd wear casual brown slacks with a striped or checked shirt, his brown fedora, and he'd grip the bottom of that textured wheel with both hands and turn carefully, glancing over each shoulder for Cossacks, or rather the careless and bigoted people of the New World. For he felt more powerful and slightly safer, though still cautious, in his Rambler, which was nearing the end of its life, as it had been produced by a failing company, the American Motors Corporation, from whom he'd bought a small amount of stock when I was born, still believing. Years later, I took the worthless certificate from the locked box under the house, framed it, and hung it on the wall of my study carefully, all the while whistling as if I were a young buck just off the boat and gazing into the sounds of our redemption. I'm going to do something. I'm going to try something now with y'all. I hope it works. I'm going to share my screen. Don't look at that. And where's my preview? I'm going to give you. Okay, so this is, I know it's probably complicated by things all around your. Can you see the picture? Okay. This is from, I don't know if I need to make it smaller, slightly smaller. This is from Robert Frank's The Americans, which I wrote some poems, ekphrastic poems, you would say, about the photographs in that famous book. And I'm going to read you 3 of them. This one's called Venice West, Venice, California, from Robert Frank's The Americans. The small frame bungalow can't escape its garden. A tangle of squat trees, fronds, vines, and flowers. An old Ford is also entangled, as is an Adirondack chair, temporary home for the aging man in worn coat, white fedora. He stares grimly into the mess he's created. 3 wives, 3 failed businesses. Still, he shades himself with the American flag, perseveres for the sake of the Medicis, Henry VIII, Daniel Boone and Huck Finn, while his estranged daughter Anne cavorts south of here, determined to prove him wrong. This is St. Francis and the gas station, also from Robert Frank's The Americans. This poem was not with the picture, but the poem was published in Christopher Buckley's Miramar. So he's an old friend, and I was very proud to have it there. This is also in Los Angeles. So these photos were taken in the late 40s, early 50s, maybe mid 50s at most. St. Francis and the gas station from Robert Frank's The Americans. Dim morning, wreath of smog. The humpbacked sedans crowd into the parking lot behind the adobe station as if water were there. While nearby stands a statue, darkened, of St. Francis tilting to the hot sky, giving benediction to this city of the angels, where the lost who still believe have come to die. And maybe you're familiar with this one too. Outside Santa Fe, also from The Americans. Save gas, 5 lonely pumps, nothing else but distance. My father believed in this. He said, we'll get there. Now he's dead, or should be. There is no saving us now. I never read that like that before. That was fun. All right. So another image for you. I hope you don't get scared. Like, hang on here. Grip the side of your chair. This is John Brown. You all know John Brown, the most famous abolitionist. And gotta find the poem. Most famous abolitionist, and he had a cave in southern Nebraska where I lived as a child, and we literally did go visit it. And from that cave, he launched raids of attack on Lawrence, Kansas, and other places during the struggle to decide whether Kansas would be a free state or a slave state, Bleeding Kansas. Maybe you know that history. And then he went on to attack Harper's Ferry in Virginia to try to get guns to give to the slaves so they could revolt and become free. And then he was captured for that and hung. I'm gonna switch on you in the middle of this poem, so I hope I do it without too much awkwardness. Plate. Oh, one other thing I do want to say about this is the oxen are the ones that carried the wagons westward. And they had these, they had their straps and their, the words aren't coming, but, picture oxen at the end of this poem. Plate. We visited John Brown's cave in the mid-60s in southern Nebraska, where the land still reeked of our pioneer efforts to get to the other side. And the cave was sufficiently gloomy, for there were still those race wars raging far away in Kansas and LA and Newark and Birmingham, triggered by yet another twist on the dark. And after we had toured it, we came out into the blinding light of another Great Plains day with its outdoor gift shop, where kind women were selling Kennedy memorabilia faster than anything about that grim-visaged puritanical man who gave his life up for a violence warped by the noble cause. And so, being of an impressionable age, plus always on the lookout for new heroes, I used my allowance to buy a plate with the bright face of our recently murdered president, for I knew little about this country erupting like the boils on Brown's face. And naturally, during the long drive home across the empty plain, I grew more enamored with my new hero as I traced the raw ceramic edges and let a chewed thumbnail touch down on the strong brow and cheekbones as if they might nourish me into the future. But when we finally arrived at the long white ranch house in a suburban part of Nebraska's only real city, where there were no black faces, save the friendly domestics bussed over to us, I stepped from the back seat of our brand new Chevrolet, and the plate slipped from my hands and broke into pieces against the hard macadam that drapes the earth with more sin given. More sin given to turn us into grim gophers popping up for light after the rain, or crusty lizards under the rocks amid some weird inward kind of storm. I write this having been a lizard all my life. But when I hear about the men of Kansas and LA and Ferguson again, I taste the yoke of the hidebound strap that steers our dark and nervous sons. Okay, now you got to deal with my face again for 2 more poems. I'm going to read a poem that was in America, We Call Your Name. I'm actually going to read the version in my book, The Distant Sound. This is The Distant Sound. I don't know if I brought it up, but this poem was originally in America, We Call Your Name, which is a fantastic anthology, Poems of Resistance and Resilience, published after Trump was elected. And this is a slightly different version of it. The Disciple. He lifts the Cadillac up onto 80 going west, pulls a cigarette from the breast pocket of his denim shirt, though as a practicing Muslim, he does not smoke. But the road is an addiction the Quran does not forbid. And the jobs he's quit and the books he's read were kindling. So now the flames inside burn no color and no religion, just one man trying to escape his plight via the promise here on the fading yet still fecund stones of home. And then I'm going to finish this thing a little more upbeat, cheerful, positive, because I know there was a lot of grimness there, but so what's the answer? Well, here you go. Here's the answer. This is the first poem in Western Angels. It's called Running Up the Eno. The Eno is a river in North Carolina, after William Carlos Williams. Beautiful river, beautiful river. It's spring, and the new leaves are incandescent as light fills a forest that will darken soon. This river is muddy, quiet, catches the pollen and sets it eastward. I have been running west, but pause to listen to the birds, the traffic, distant and ominous. The peace in this park depends upon something inside of us turning away from the grail to the holy that is present always. Pray for the rabbis in Eastern Europe who stayed, for the unsnapped pictures of Indian life, for the inward journey, this river whose serenity is enough. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Eliot. Eliot Schain, The Distant Sound. Thank you. And next, we have Dean Nurkse. His gorgeous new collection is A Country of Strangers, new and selected poems, reporting from his work over 35 years. He writes as an empath would write, as if he were prescient about war, politics, human places, and the hidden stories of the heart. He is author of 11 previous collections. I hope I have that right. Those numbers could get slippery, including Love in the Last Days, After Tristan, and Isolde. If you go to poetryflash.org and scroll down on the front page, you will see an interview with him discussing that book, Green Birth and Green Death, conducted by Lee Rossi. Ilya Kaminsky says about A Country of Strangers. What a joy to have this overview of Dean Nurkse's marvelous poems. He is a master of lyric mode, one in whose hands the lines immediately come alive. Magic breathes, nuance shimmers, and becomes the world all its own. See the doors open into the unknown, and we see that it is strangely familiar, because strangeness is, in fact, our first language, the one we mouthed before words. Nurkse's honors include a literature award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and a Guggenheim. His poems have appeared in the New Yorker, American Poetry Review, the Paris Review. He's taught poetry in prisons and as Brooklyn Poet Laureate in schools and the public library system. He's also worked for human rights organizations. Please give a warm Poetry Flash Jazz Hands welcome for Dennis Nurkse.
Thank you so much. Am I unmuted? You guys can hear me, right? It's just very moving to be here. Eliot and I go back to around the time of John Brown. We've known each other forever. And it's just a cool thing, you know, to stick with something that you love, like writing, and be able to look back through time. You know, I remember Eliot's early work, so when I see the later work, it's just like listening to an arc, you know, a sort of psychic arc, a spiritual arc. And it's just such a beautiful thing to do with the time that we're given on earth. So I'm, you know, very grateful for hearing Eliot's work, and so much to say about Poetry Flash. You know, first of all, the power of an organization like Poetry Flash, but also the contingency, the fragility. I mean, I think the organization, I mean, I feel like Joyce and Richard have been hanging by their fingernails from a cliff ever since I can remember. And it just moves me that, you know, I don't want to take that for granted. You know, I don't want to feel like, well, they have long, powerful fingernails, they can keep this up forever. You know, I really want to honor how hard it is to do that, you know, because I think it's easy to found an arts organization and start promoting an arts organization, but to keep it going in hard times when people take it for granted, when they take your work for granted, that is really, really special. You know, the poet Mercedes Sosa in Argentina talks about people who struggle for one day. They're amazing, but people who struggle all their lives, they become invisible, but they're indispensable. They're not amazing, they're indispensable. So grateful to Poetry Flash. You know, I mean, I feel like I saw that logo when I was a young poet. I'm seeing it now. People have given their lives to keep that logo on the screen and in print. So thank you so much. I'm going to read some poems that are pretty contemporary. I'm reading from a laptop, and they're from the book, The Country of Strangers, A Country of Strangers. Very grateful for, you know, people ask me, how did you do the selection process for a new and selected? I was just overjoyed to be asked to do that book. I haven't had a life where publishers have always knocked on my door and asked me to do books, so that I was so happy to do it. I was not going to make it an agonizing selection process. But this is the first poem in the book, and it's from the George Floyd moment, which is still so much with us. It's called Order to Disperse. It's dedicated to my students. Tonight, my children are facing live ammunition. One holds a rock, one brought a Bible, one hides a phone. The fires of the provocateurs burn so brightly. The police put duct tape over their badges. The soldiers are hooded. They wear no insignia. Last night they had rubber bullets, tonight hollow point. In the smoke, you see the outlines of a bank, a cathedral. Absent as the profiles of presidents on coins. A voice advances, a voice retreats. Someone aims. Have you ever died in a dream? What happened then? Tell me what happened. There is only one life. How long will I hold mine? Like water in cupped hands. That was a moment where, you know, I had been teaching students and they were all on a campus. Then there was the pandemic. These kids all ended up at home, and you could see one kid was in a trailer, another kid was in a mansion because we were Zooming. And then these kids were in the streets and America was behind them. And then you looked again and America was no longer behind them. But the outcome has not been written yet, but it certainly relates to what Eliot was sharing with us about John Brown. A man who felt like he literally couldn't stand enslavement, couldn't breathe while it was happening, you know, and there were many, many more reasonable things he could have done than what he did. This is a poem about mass incarceration. It's a prose poem. It's called The Detentions. In death, too, There are great cities, streets of padlocked binderies under rain that tastes of piss. Cathedrals with bricked-in windows, gauges lit by drop lights, tenements with narrow stairs covered by linoleum treads worn smooth as the ball of a thumb. Catch your breath on any landing. A heart or a name will be scratched in the wall. Here too is the dim room where lovers test each other as you push against the slats of a fence, word after word, caress after caress. Here too, you hear cards whoosh in the distance, crazily absent, and lights cross the ceiling as if a child flung a handful of rice. A scrap of passing music calls you more intimate than a voice. Here too, a red glare pulses and someone shouts. Again, you look down from a great height. Is the man in cuffs drunk? Why is he staggering? Again, you have to decide. Do I yell out the window and show where I live? Do I take a video on my cell? Where would I send it? Do I run down those endless flights into the street, waving my hands and commanding? No. Would I at least be able to memorize the license plate? Would it be blank? Even at the end of death, prepare yourself, even where there is no I, no judgment, no reward. It's so strange to me that we live in the time of mass incarceration. There's a poem that you guys probably know by Etheridge Knight, The Idea of Ancestry. And he wrote it when he was in prison. And he talks about having 70 pictures of his family on the wall. And what an anomaly he was as a prisoner. He wrote that poem in the early 60s, and in the next 30 years, it was unlikely that there would be a family of 70 to 90 Black people and there wouldn't be a few people incarcerated. Things changed and incarceration rates changed. Whether you had Democratic presidents or Republican, this is a poem that is about teaching at Rikers Island. It's called The White Prisons. The kids ask, do you also teach in the white prisons? There are white schools, white libraries, white hospitals, churches, parks, and ball fields. Why wouldn't there be white prisons? Snow pulses in a tiny barred window, an idea at once vague and obsessive. The kids have been writing their poem. It starts with a blank page, a doodle in the margin, but soon you are a child in the streets. Oily slush seeps up through the soles of your shoes. You pass a Burger King, Zion Redeemer, the ironworks under sleet. Pitkin Avenue does not reach all the way to morning. The white Lexus appears out of nowhere. Where to run? Icy stoops, steel shod doors. I expect to live another 3 years, maybe 2 and 6 weeks, 6 weeks and 7 days, probably to my 19th birthday. It happens every night in my mind. The long street, the hour before dawn, the white Lexus, my enemy's face in the tinted window, so familiar, so masked. A lot of these kids that I worked with had such a definite idea of when they would die. It was almost a security to them, a landmark in their life. Yeah, I remember kids saying, "One love to my thugs in heaven, I see you there." And, you know, he was looking forward to a reunion with his friends, and he was about 17. Let me read you a poem. After that, you probably want to hear a poem about Caligula. And this is a poem about Caligula. People have compared our politicians to Shakespearean heroes, but they're not at all as smart as Shakespearean heroes. But we have politicians that are very similar to Caligula. This poem is after Suetonius. Caligula ordered the night sky illuminated. Every stoop, porch, or balcony was a stage. He made the senators dress as prostitutes, tight silk shirts, paste-on eyelashes, up to a matron to wriggle into a boy's shorts. Marcus Severus, one-armed veteran of our labyrinthine border wars, had to hobble into the amphitheater armed with a plume and attack a lion. A plume. We were fascinated. We were all players. Who was the audience? The emperor chose me, and slept with us. He was passive as a bedpost, but listed his demands in documents we had to sign in advance. Slaves who had been stockbrokers or insurance agents a moment ago carried triremes on their backs to Rome. Sails billowed above our 7 sacred hills. Would it ever end? We were enthralled. Every breath was a saga when you longed to skip to the finale. We no longer brushed our teeth, or picked a scab. Just him. It was Cassius Chaerea who killed him, that silent tribune he called, quote, pansy. The emperor lay on his golden bed. We were mesmerized. All we could do was compete to reconstruct the portents. Headless chicken racing all morning, kitten born without eyes. Huge cloud, tiny cloud, cloud like a fist. For a few hours, the chronicler listened and scribbled, but soon he grew bored. We were bored ourselves. So began Caligula's slow death. Caligula, who so often said of a captive, make him feel as if he's really dying. Now we're helpless as always, faced with twilight, a child crying, bird song, the breeze, our 7 sacred hills. And that poem is very much about the idea of public cruelty, you know, cruelty becoming part of something that people are proud of in public discourse rather than something that they hide or are ashamed of. It's bizarre to see that. My parents came to this country in 1940. They met on a boat out of Portugal. And There was a lot of things that they didn't talk about, and a lot of those things are the kinds of things that we've been watching recently. This is a poem that's possibly more hopeful. It's called Showers, and it's about my daughter, though it could be about other kids in my life. The child tells me, put a brick in the toilet. Don't wear leather. Don't eat brisket, snapper, or farmed salmon. Not tells, orders. Doesn't she know the sluice gates were left open and 1 trillion gallons wasted just for the dare of it, until the staring eye shares that thrill, confessing, I am just iris and cornea, blind spot where brain meets mind, the place where the image forms itself, image of the coming storm. But the child waits outside the bathroom with the watch she got for best diorama, muttering, 2 minutes too long. Half measures, I say. She says, action. I say, I'm just one man. She says, 7 billion. If you choose, the sea goes back. This is a love poem, The Body. It's in a few parts. 1, a small animal, perhaps an otter, darted under our wheels. My wife was driving, no time to swerve. I sensed no impact. She braked. I scrutinized the tarmac for blood. Nothing, not a scrap of fur, though the road seemed to hum, alert as skin to the touch, reek of pepper and must, pent-up hush of late summer. Behind a scrim of willows, a glint seemed to slip backwards. 2, before we were born, we found ways not to exist. Happily, playfully, thriving on no fish, 1 billion years before the universe exploded. No one missed us. We didn't miss ourselves. There was no absence. 3, leery of ticks, we part ash leaves, and here's Gihon River, an ant clinging stoically to a frayed petal, a bee flying gamely underwater. 4, evening, we won't come back to this angle of scorched tar, logged forest choked with brush, Canada hunched behind a bluff. A farmhouse lights as we watch, porch, then kitchen, like a toy. You can hear a child intoning the score of a jump rope game, solemnly, with sleepy urgency, as if blurting out a secret, every syllable held and slurred in the loud shush of current. Radio signals link galaxies, but we're so close, all we know of ourselves is the blur of an eyelash. After us, the white line, the wall of pines. It's funny, I mean, it occurred to me quite late in life that it seemed like such a consolation that, like, I had kind of not lived for eternity before I was born. Nothing bad happened. It seemed very enjoyable. So why would I worry about not living afterwards, it's kind of the same eternity. And it seemed like a very cheerful idea. And then I read there's a psychological condition, which is the phobia of not having existed before you were born. So I guess people can be phobic about anything. And what consoled me was not necessarily going to console everybody. This is a poem about America or marriage or one of those things. Money. Once I made her take all the items out of the grocery bag and tick them off against the receipt while the old dog watched through a sheen of cataracts. What is this item? I asked. CSPK. She showed me. It was the root of a fruit I had never tasted, sweet and salty. It was my death that I once knew by heart and now try to mollify by counting. It was dark night coming when we dozed side by side in separate dreams of marriage. And there were other issues. Why 3 cans of stewed pears when they were offered at 9 for 12? The cat commented, I was going to the garden to kill a fat rabbit, but you can't afford a sparrow, only a blue moth, so weightless it drifts against the open claw. I knew it was a code, but I was the husband, 7 letters of an alphabet, one of the chess pieces that must find a way to move the hand, exploit the arrogance of the right, the diffidence of the left. Let the sparrow, eloquent in death, teach me from the cat's mouth how to live in time. This is a short love poem called This Life. After swimming in Kiln Lake, we were so tired, you and I. We dried ourselves with a nubby towel that smells of dog, then slept side by side in the tall grass, careless of ticks. When we woke, it was this life. We dried each other again with our fingertips. Venus had risen, and a red star flashing at the horizon, Antares or Betelgeuse. As always, we waited for a sign. Let this life be a sign. We heard the frogs calling, almost ranting, and saw no one. The rushes bent to our shape, a glowworm, 2 clumps of breathing earth. This poem is another poem with a child in it. It's called Game with a Mad Bounce. The child and I are kicking a pebble down the road. The child is Gautama. The pebble is Saint Teresa. And I'm no one, or we are both Gramsci. The road is Maimonides, and you are no one, or the child counts steps to frozen yogurt. I'm an old man with cancer. The pebble is no one, and no one loves us so. It's raining in the White Mountains, but here, just the pang of wood smoke. Here, joy and sorrow are a fence and a lit window. Here, God's silence is the silence of a cricket. Evening in the pines, the dog barking across the lake, the guitar that thinks it's human, the cricket practicing to be a cricket, the thrush puffed up with attitude, all to impress a listener, but there is no listener. August and a spindled leaf, a blue moth sailing backwards, the pigtail girls on the island, pouring make-believe tea into cups too delicate to see, all to make a watcher cry, but there is no watcher. Human mind, created by bird song, night sky and a dollop of rain. Why do you cling so fiercely to the aftertaste of burnt sugar? Turn and face yourself, if there is a self. You know, some of these poems you just make up. I mean, this poem says there is no watcher. Another poem says there is only one life. You know, don't sue me if I'm wrong. I'm just writing a poem, which is an advantage of being a poet and not a philosopher or a guru. I'm going to conclude with a poem. This is a prose poem called A Clearing on Ruth Island. And this poem has a child insects evening. The child sees the firefly far off in the birches. It's very late. I did not expect another summer, another child. So much darkness. She trots away to catch it. Possibly 9 minutes later, she lopes back barely winded. There is the light in her cupped hands. She shows it off. Look how it flashes. She will pass it to me. I can feel the little wind and the adamant wing against my palms. My life is almost over. I pass it back. She waves it up dramatically. We watch for a greenish spark. If the night is clear and we can stare up for a full minute, we are guaranteed to see a satellite, a star whose name I know. There are only 5. A glittering meteor, a comet, or the glint of a plane headed to the Arctic. Those towering ghostly shapes must be the huge, unmoving cumulus of late summer. The clouds Jesus referred to when he said, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. These close, low, humpbacked shapes must be the fishermen's boats, hauled high and tarped. No lamps on the island. What light there is seems to come from under our sneakers. Now the fireflies are pulsing in phase. You could parse it out like the meter of a fugue. The plan is obvious. Earth will become more and more beautiful until I can't stand it. Then I will vanish. It will be in my mind that the skiffs are hauled up, safe from the wild tide. In my mind that the silly, sleepless accordion plays Sweet Lorraine, oversweet across deep water. I can't see the child, but she takes my pinky almost angrily. She will lead me back to Schofield, counting our steps on the dark path. When we come to 1,000,000, we will be home. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that beautiful, beautiful reading. I'm so grateful that to hear you today. Thanks to our amazing poets, Eliot, Schain, Dennis Nurkse. Thank you, thank you, thank you. to see their excellent books, to purchase their books, please go to bookshop.org/shop/poetryflash. And Eliot's book, The Distant Sound, is also available at Small Press Distribution, spdbooks.org. And thanks to our technical support today, Rosalinda Monroy. She was wonderful. Thank you. And if you are here joining us in person and not watching this on YouTube after the fact, where the recording will be posted, we'll leave the Zoom on for a few minutes to say hello. So thank you. Thanks so much for joining us today.